All right, I believe we are ready to get started. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. Today's topic will be pavement management, and we will be focusing on budgets and strategies. Before we get started, I wanted to touch on the webinar controls that you see on your screen. You should see them up there now. All attendees right now are in listen-only mode, so you're all muted at this time. The questions pod, which you see highlighted there towards the top right, is where you'll type any questions or comments that you have. Feel free to use this at any time, and we will have several points during the presentation where we'll stop to address any questions that's posted there. Finally, under the materials button, you should have one handout, which is a copy of the presentation, and you can click it to download for future use. My name is Tally Faulkner, and I'll be handling the technical support for today's webinar. If you have any issues during the webinar, you can reach out to us in the questions pod, or you can also email us at arltap@uark.edu. The instructor for today's webinar is Stacy Williams. Dr. Williams is the director of the Center for Training Transportation Professionals and is also on the faculty of the Civil Engineering Department at the University of Arkansas. This webinar is sponsored by the Arkansas LTAP program, and Patrick Thomas with RDOT is the program manager within RDOT. Today's webinar will generate 2 hours of Rhodes Scholar credit through the Arkansas LTAP program, and you will receive a certificate, which will probably be mailed to you by the end of next week. Keep in mind that you must attend the full webinar to receive a certificate. Finally, if you have a group attending with you today, please let us know who is attending with you so that we can make sure all attendees receive a certification. To do that, please send an email with your list to arltap@uark.edu. And again, you see that towards the middle left side of your screen, that email. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Williams.
Very good. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We are going to be talking about pavement management. And so to start this off, I would like to just do a poll and get an idea from the audience. I'm going to launch this poll now, so you should see it come up on your screen. And I want to know how mature is your agency's pavement management system? And whether you know for sure or not, just kind of put your perspective of how well you think that system is going. Is it well developed, fully established? Is it sort of established but still developing, still in the early stages? Maybe you don't have a formalized pavement management system yet, or you may not know. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. It looks like we have a pretty good cross-section of all of the categories, with about a third of you saying that you don't have a system, another third of you saying that you have a somewhat established program but are still developing that. So that means we hopefully will all learn a little bit of something today. So pavement management, first of all, what is it? It's really just a system for collecting, storing, and evaluating roadway condition data to determine the most efficient repair or preservation strategies. So we're trying to figure out, what have we got, what are we going to do, and how can we preserve all of the value that we have in that network. So in terms of managing a network, when you look at a roadway, even if you built a brand new road and it was in perfect condition and you did nothing to it and you put no traffic on it, you're still going to have some issues. You're still going to have aging, you're going to have weathering, so that pavement's going to deteriorate no matter what, just because it is outside on its own. But then you compound that with increased traffic, and we can forecast and make some guesstimates of what types of traffic we will have over the life of that pavement, but that can be really hard to pin down and get an accurate forecast. You may have new subdivisions, new development that increases traffic in different types of traffic patterns. So where you may have expected an increase in your traffic, maybe you didn't know exactly where that was going to happen. And some of those roadways may not have been designed to handle the kinds of traffic patterns that develop over time. It can be as simple as utility cuts and things that go on that kind of harm the integrity of that pavement. And even though we try to do the best we can of patching that and putting it back, it's still a cut that has happened in the pavement. So it's not like it was when it was new. And then beyond all of our control would be those severe weather events that happen, and those seem to happen more and more these days. So we'll have some pretty catastrophic failures, and those require a whole different type of correction. So we need to think about things, though, not just in this road, that road. We really need to think about it in terms of the network level. So bird's eye view, if you're in charge of an agency and you have a roadway network within your jurisdiction, we need to keep an eye on the overall value of that entire network, even though the projects that we do will be very detailed and assigned to specific locations. Always keep those in context of the entire roadway network. Now, keys to pavement management. I say this a lot: do the right thing to the right road at the right time. That can be a little more difficult than it sounds, but it's a great thing to say. We want to do the right thing to the right road and do it at the right time. All of those pieces are critical. Some of the keys then also are to match the distresses to the treatment. If we have a roadway maybe that's starting to deteriorate, it's not that bad, and so I put into my schedule that I need to do some minor corrective action to this roadway, but then there's a budget cut or we have delays, and then we push that fix down the road a year or two. That roadway is not going to be in the same condition that it was when I planned that corrective action. So making sure that we do it at the right time and make sure that the distress at the time of the project is appropriate for the type of treatment that we're going to give it. So we need to have a systematic method for choosing those projects so that we're treating all of those roadways fairly, because again, the goal is that bird's eye view, the overall network. How can we get the maximum value out of what we already have and improve the overall condition as a whole? This is going to take a lot of money. It would be great if we all had tons of money and we could just fix every road out there, but no one can actually do that. So we have to figure out a very systematic way to optimize the use of those tax dollars. And then the other thing about having a system in place where you have data that supports all of your decisions is it helps reduce the political pressure of why are you doing this one and not that one. It's just a matter of the numbers. We have a system, we're following our plan. It's not someone's opinion over someone else's. And then if you have a system like that, it can also help you plan ahead better in terms of funding, and it may help you secure additional funding for some of those projects. Now, looking at pavements, we said that a brand new pavement, we would like to think that it's perfect, and maybe it is, but it should at least be close. Not always totally perfect, but then over time, we add the weather, we add the aging, we add the traffic and all of the situations, and that deterioration is going to happen over time. So we see that the condition of the pavement drops over time. So I've got a straight line drawn there. It would be so much easier if that's how it actually worked, but it's not. What we actually see is more of a curve. So a new pavement will continue to be in good condition for a period of time. And then after a while, you see that that curve starts to turn a little bit sharper and we see a steeper downhill slope. And what I use is a color-coded system. We've got green, that represents good. Yellow represents fair. Orange is getting more into a critical type of situation. And then the different shades of red, of course, will indicate poorer performance. So we see that over time, this does change. In reality, that curve is not the same for every road. So if we talk about all the roads in our network, they don't all have the same curve. That probably might fall into some sort of a band, but especially as you get down into the poorer conditions, that band is going to get wider. It's much more difficult to predict exactly how that's going to go. Now, if we were to collect data and say, here's the condition of road ABC today, next year, and we plot all of that, it's not even going to be a smooth curve. Sometimes we see a little bit of a drop, and then the next year, maybe not so much. And that can be definitely a function of the years that you have some severe weather impacts. So at some point, though, we decide that we need to do something to improve the quality of that roadway. And the green arrow that you see on your screen represents some type of a corrective action or a maintenance treatment where we're going to take that condition and we're going to bring it back up, hopefully into the green category, good condition, and we kind of start the clock over. So it will perform well for a while, and we shift that deterioration curve off to the right. So we're moving that along. That's extending the life of the pavement. Now, if I do that before the pavement gets to be in too terrible a condition, it's going to cost X amount. But if I wait until that gets worse, you see the length of the green arrow that's required to bring that condition back up to a satisfactory level. It's a bigger green arrow that represents a lot more money in trying to get that accomplished. There are a number of statistics out there, but in general, every dollar that you spend early in the pavement's life is going to save you a whole lot of dollars later in the pavement's life. So if you can do something to get that good condition, keep it in good condition, and do those small things that maintain or preserve the value, then you are way ahead in terms of budgets. The catch is we got to get it in good condition to be able to do that. We also see that approximately 40% of a pavement's quality is spent during the first 75% of its life. The last 40% of its quality gets used up in the last 10% of its life. So you see that once we cross over that inflection point, we see that it gets bad really quick. And so we need to figure out, what is that inflection point? Where does that happen? And again, it's different for every pavement. So collecting data and keeping up with how things trend in your agency, your roadway network, that's going to be critical in helping out. So if we can preserve, we don't have to do as much correction. Now, pavement preservation is a big topic. Federal Highways pushes this quite a bit because it just makes sense. If the dollars kind of work out where keeping something in good condition, in theory, is much easier than having to correct something that's broken. But they've given it a definition, so a lot of words on the screen, but it's basically a program employing a network level. And that's what we talked about, the bird's eye view, big picture. It's a long-term strategy because we don't have the money to do all that we want to do all at once. So we've got to be able to kind of meter this out over time to improve that overall condition. But we want to enhance that pavement performance by using an integrated, cost-effective set of practices and extend the pavement life, improve safety, and meet motorist expectations. We are, generally speaking, in a public service type of role, and we are serving the traveling public. So we want to do the best we can with what we have. Now, if you really think about preservation, that term means to preserve or keep the value that you have. And we apply this in a lot of areas of life. Think about in the medical world, just you personally, if you go to the doctor, some people will go to the doctor anytime they feel just a little bit not right. They go get everything checked out. Other people just don't want to go to the doctor, so they don't. So we have a wide range of how people tend to react to those types of situations. The same way with vehicles. We have some folks that will do all of their scheduled maintenance right on schedule, right to the T, and everything that could be done, they pretty much do that whether it really needs it or not at that time. And then there are others who will drive the wheels off of it and decide, I'll just fix it when it breaks. So these different philosophies really carry over into pavement management as well. We can look at this in healthcare, auto industry, food service, technology, security, home repairs, even yard work. So what it really boils down to is some of the psychology behind how we make decisions. And I would argue that it's really based on risk. And risk carries consequences. So consequences generally kind of push us to do one thing over another. So I'm going to pop another poll question here. There we go. That should be on your screen now. How does your agency decide when to apply a maintenance treatment? Do you have more the philosophy of we need to do things on schedule, ahead of schedule, kind of like going to the dentist? You go and get those regular checkups versus not going and then deciding just to get that cavity or that crown or root canal later on if it needs it. So the choices in the context of roadway preservation would be deciding to apply treatments based on the condition of the roadway, the complaints that you get from the public, sometimes it's political preference, or maybe you're not sure what your agency does. All right, very good. Time and condition are the two winners. So I'm going to end that. We'll go back to the presentation. So making decisions, you might choose to do things on a time schedule. For instance, your agency might do chip seal, and in that chip seal program, you figured out that every 6 to 7 years, roadways need to be resurfaced with a new layer of that chip seal. So you just have your network on a schedule. Maybe this year we do these roads or this area of the county. Next year we'll do that area and so forth. And that can work especially if your traffic is consistent and similar around the different areas of your agency. Condition, we fix it when it gets bad. If we see something going wrong, that's usually kind of an indicator that, oh, I got to pay attention to that. This is not good. I need to fix it. Some agencies tend to kind of work off of complaints. So when someone calls, we've got a pothole, we've got this problem, roadway is rough, this is by my house, I have to drive over it every day. And you do field a lot of complaint calls. Sadly, in a public service type of setting, no news is good news. When they don't call, we take that as a compliment. When they do call, they expect something to be fixed. So the problem is if we react to those complaints, we're probably treating the worst roads first. And that's not really what we want to do when you take it in perspective of big picture. So we need to make some data-driven decisions, which means we have to have some data. So inventory, I've got to know what I've got. You can't manage a network if you don't have a good handle on exactly what's in that network. So we have to have an inventory. There's mapping, identify locations. We'd like to know what pavement structure you have, how many inches of base, how many inches of maybe a sub base or surface. Was it always an asphalt paved roadway, or was it a gravel roadway up to a certain time and then it converted to a chip seal or converted to a full pavement structure? What are the dimensions? How wide are your lanes? What about traffic? Do you have accurate traffic counts? Do you know about the percentage of trucks that run those roadways? What functional class is that roadway? Do you know about the construction history? What's been done? How often are you going back and doing something different to that roadway? How fast are things changing? Drainage is a big one. Sometimes we kind of gloss over that because it's difficult to deal with, but drainage has a huge impact on how well those roadways will perform. So collecting drainage information is also important. And then, of course, condition. Now, pavement management, again, is that long-term systematic method for effectively extending the pavement life while optimizing limited maintenance budgets. And everybody knows what I mean. Limited budgets are everywhere. So figure out, what do we have? What condition is it in? And how can we preserve it to the best of our ability? So we start out by establishing that inventory, and we figure out what we want to know, and some of that we should already know. We know what roadways we have most of the time. There are actually some agencies who have been surprised, like, do you know exactly how many linear miles of paved roadways, of chip sealed roadways, or of unpaved roads? Do you have an accurate count of that? And that sounds kind of silly, but if you think about it, there are cases where new subdivisions are built, or maybe someone lives way down a county road and they have a private drive, but then they sold off some of their property. More families moved in, built houses, and it became more developed. That private drive kind of got absorbed into the county roadway network now. So when things change, do you have a good system for updating those totals? So what do you have and what do you not have? Those are the things that you need. And then you need a plan to get that information. Who's going to collect the data? Who's going to use the data? But more importantly, who will maintain the data? I've seen a number of cases where especially smaller local agencies know that they need to do some of these things. They don't have a lot of extra manpower. Nobody's sitting around going, boy, I wish I could do some pavement management work and collect data. But when you formalize a system, someone has to be responsible for that. So think through that long-term implication. It's not just collecting a bunch of data on the front end and then we're finished. Condition of roadways will change over time, which means we're constantly having to review and get more data to add to that database. And then how are you going to store the data? How are you going to keep up with it? What level of skill is needed to manage that data? Is this something that anyone can look at and figure it out, or is it really complicated and it's going to be hard to maintain in the future? So institutional knowledge is very important. You've probably got a couple of folks in your road department that know a whole lot of stuff. And even if it's not on paper, you can ask them and they can remember. I call this George. Everybody has a George somewhere in their roadway department who can remember an amazing level of detail and have random facts at hand. But if George leaves, no one else knows it. So it's very comforting to have George there to say, hey, do you remember when was this? What happened? But if George doesn't document those things, when George wins the lottery and is gone and living it up on the beach, now we don't have George. We've lost a lot of that knowledge. So documenting those things, mapping, and making sure that we have someone who's taking ownership and responsibility for maintaining the information that we're collecting, because it is a lot of work to collect it all. So inventory, again, location, you know where your roads are, you know the names and the numbers, but coordinate with other agencies. Maybe you could get some benefit from working with your emergency management section, decide how you're going to geolocate some things. Think about separating out the districts, wards, zones, quadrants, different portions of your agency so that you can make some decisions that are fair across the entire area. And then, of course, pavement type. What's the surface? What are the layers there? That goes back to the pavement design and the construction of that project. And then the area, that's going to help us in knowing the length and the width. When we start estimating, we need to know the quantities for the treatment that we want to apply. So having all of that readily at hand helps with budgeting tremendously. And then some more things here. Construction records, when maintenance was done. A lot of times we may have a good handle on the construction records, but some of the maintenance kind of doesn't get documented sometimes. And then any documentation we have on drainage, particularly any drainage improvements that were done. And then if you have subgrade information, very important, very helpful to have. And then cost. If you have cost data from any of that construction and maintenance activity, we know overall prices tend to go up, not down, but having something, at least a relative sense of the cost of some of those things is very helpful. And then traffic level. Some folks will use traffic counters, get very detailed information. Others do not. It is very helpful to know what percentage trucks you have. If you're in a rural area, sometimes you think, oh, we don't have a huge amount of traffic, and you kind of gloss over that. Traffic and traffic loadings are very different things. In a rural area, you may have log trucks, chicken trucks, dump trucks. Everybody has the garbage trucks and the dump trucks probably, but there are a lot of those types of vehicles that are actually putting more wear and tear on the roadways even when you don't have a large volume of traffic. So trucks are an important feature. Functional class, this is just federal functional class if you keep track of that. Arterials are those roadways that are kind of your main drag through town. What are the main routes that get people as quickly as possible to a location but may not have quite as much access? Local roads are the ones that give you access to about every driveway that you need to go, and then collectors are the ones in between. I've got those in orange here. Now, from all of this information, the thing that is missing is condition. We do need to have accurate condition, and we know that that is time-based. The other thing that we would like to know is not just, is it good, bad, or ugly, but we want to know what types of distresses there are on those particular roadways. Some of that will be structural, some of it will be non-structural. Structural type distresses will be longitudinal cracking, that's cracking in the wheel path, alligator cracking, base failures, subgrade rutting, faulting, pumping, corner breaks on concrete roadways. But this is something where we've got, this is the bigger problem, a deep problem that's going to require a deep solution. So when you have structural failures, you really need to work from the bottom up. You can't just put a Band-Aid over the top. A new overlay on an interstate freeway that's very deteriorated is not going to fix everything. Might be smooth for a few weeks, but you're going to start to see those distresses show their face right back there at the surface. So again, when the problem goes deep into the structure, the solution has to do the same thing. But there are also a lot of non-structural things like transverse cracking, longitudinal cracking that's not in the wheel path, block cracking, raveling, weathering, bleeding, flushing, asphalt mixture rutting. And these are the kinds of distresses that surface treatments will help. And those are the less expensive types of treatments. Now, if you do not treat your non-structural distresses, they will turn into structural distresses. So you see, it's very important when we start seeing some of these that that's not so bad. That doesn't mean don't fix it. That just means we have an opportunity right now to fix it much more easily, much more cost effectively than waiting until it turns structural. So making decisions, how do we make these decisions? Again, the structural versus non-structural is really where it starts. Knowing, is this just a surface issue or is it something that's going to go much deeper than that? So bigger problems or bigger expenses, surface issues, we have a chance to preserve that remaining structure. And that is like somebody gave you a gift. So repair strategies, first thing is drainage. If you look at pavement design, all pavement design concepts start with managing drainage. Pavements and water are not friends, so we need to keep the two of those separated. So drainage, drainage, drainage. Make the surface of your pavement as impermeable as possible. So if you have any cracking on the roadway, that is an opening where water can get down in that crack and get into the pavement structure. As soon as that starts happening, that condition curve is going to start to take a nosedive. We're going to hit that inflection point and start to deteriorate much more quickly. So if I can put something on the surface to seal it and keep water out of those cracks, kudos. That is definitely something that needs to happen. We, of course, want to maintain a smooth, safe driving surface. So surface treatments also help us do that. And then restoring structure. Sometimes we can do some things to help out with the structure, but really we're going to start with the surface and then work our way down to those bigger things and only do those when we have to. So again, we're back to doing the right treatment on the right road at the right time. Now, pavement condition and treatment options are related in that, just what we've been saying. If the distress level is very small, we can do some type of a treatment that is also very small and less expensive. So up in the green category, it's not a bad thing to go ahead and do some preservation type treatments very early in the life of a pavement when it's still in good condition. Things like crack filling or sealing, if you see a crack here or there, it's not bad. Nobody's noticing, it's not a big deal. But don't leave it there because that is inviting water into the pavement structure. Maybe you see just a little bit of weathering, you may see some micro cracks, and those typically are not real visible just driving down the roadway. You need to get out and boots on the ground, get a good look at that. But when you start seeing some of those micro cracks appear, a fog seal might be appropriate to kind of seal that off, keep water from getting in. When we hit that early, we're keeping the roadway in great condition. When you start to deteriorate just a little more, go down that slide just a bit. Slurry seals, fog seals, chip seals, microsurfacing might be helpful. Into the fair category, you're going to see things like chip seals, microsurfacing, maybe some profile milling, tape seals, ultra thin bonded wearing courses. And overall, what's happening is that the treatments that are done at a certain type of distress level get more and more involved the further down the list you go. So when you get to the bottom, those ones that are in very poor condition, you can't do anything successful except for maybe a major rehabilitation, full depth, or total reconstruction. So we start eliminating a whole lot of options when we let it go that far. Now, pavement condition and roughness. There are a lot of sources out there that will show that your IRI, or International Roughness Index, can be a key factor in knowing how to manage your network. The IRI, if you are less than about 95, that would be considered good condition. 95 up to 170 inches per mile, medium. And if you're over 170 inches per mile, and this is a scale of roughness, then that's something that's going to need some major work done. A lot of us don't have a whole lot of access to that. You know, state routes are monitored regularly, but a lot of our local agencies don't necessarily have that information. But you also know as you drive around your area, you know when there's a rough road, when there's not. So does that tell us what we need to know? How can I do that? It will definitely tell you when there are some things wrong. The problem is it doesn't tell you what is wrong. If there is a crack, you feel that crack as you drive over it. It doesn't tell you what type of cracking it is. It doesn't tell you which treatment option is the best, but it can be kind of a broad scope indicator of maybe some of the things to look at. The other issue with this type of system of just looking at IRI, a lot of times by the time it feels rough or by the time you see those bigger numbers, it may be too late to do some of the less expensive alternatives. All right, at this time, I'm going to take a quick little break here for any questions. Anybody got any questions? If you do have any, just put those into the questions pod and those will come to me. It looks like we got one coming in. All right, do you recommend core samples to determine soil condition when indexing pavement condition on poor roads? Yes, I think that is a good idea. If you have poor quality roadways, it is a good idea to get some soil condition, do some soil mapping. Maybe it's something that's been done before and you can kind of point to that, but it is very helpful to know what type of soil that you have in your subgrade to help determine what fixes are going to help or not. If you see a lot of base failures and those types of things, chances are you may have some pockets of a soft subgrade. Some of that could be just the subgrade soil that's there. Some of it could actually be construction quality from when the roadway was built. So doing some core samples to pin that down is a good idea. Yes. Anything else? All right, well, if you think of anything, type it in there anytime, and then I will get to those as we go through. There will be a few spots that I stop for questions. There's one more that came in. is the webinar recorded? It is being recorded, and once we are finished, it will probably be posted probably by Friday, if not next Monday at the latest. All right, let's talk now about remaining service life. I've got another poll question to give you. Let me get that popped up. All right, it should be showing on your screen now. If you didn't touch a newly constructed asphalt pavement, how long would it last? And your answer choices are 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. All right, the most popular answer was 15 years. We got a few, about a third, I guess about a quarter said 20 years, and 18% said 10 years. All right, the answer to that question is it depends. And there was a comment that came in that it will depend on the area and the climate. That's absolutely correct. And it depends a lot on traffic. There are some roadways that I've been on looking at, trying to decide if something needed to be done or not. And they've been in service for 30 years. Not a lot of traffic, very stable subgrade soils that kind of look like they might last forever. So that's an optimal situation, of course. There have also been some roadways that were constructed during some natural gas exploration, drilling, that kind of stuff. So new roads being put in place and county roads that were used to get to those new roads. And a lot of the pretty significant treatments that were done to those lasted 6 months or less. So that's disappointing if you're spending a lot of money on that. But I would say somewhere in the 10 to 15 year range is probably, on average, maybe what you would get for average type conditions. Concrete will last longer. It is a bigger event to build that. It's a bigger event to do some maintenance on that. 90 plus, like 94%, I think is the term. 94% of the roadways in the US are asphalt. In Arkansas, specifically, where I am, we're at about 96+% there. So we do have concrete roadways, but those are typically confined to maybe a few city streets, but mostly interstates in the more metropolitan areas. So the next question is, how many miles can you afford to pave or overlay each year? And at that rate, can you keep up? Okay, so you can see where the question is going. How long does the pavement last? And if you do some repaving, overlays, whatever types of reconstruction, can you keep up at that rate? And I think most of us probably cannot. So one scenario locally is if you have 500 miles of paved roadways and you can afford to repave 10 miles per year, that means it's going to take 50 years to touch all of your pavements. And no one said 50 years. That wasn't even an answer choice because asphalt roadways just on the whole do not last that long. So for our budgets, depending on what kind of budget structure we have and how much work we're able to do, you can see where it very quickly can get out of hand and we just can't afford to do all the things that need to be done. Now, putting that in terms of the remaining service life, RSL, think of it in terms of each year, every mile in your network loses 1 year of its remaining service life. So you could say that we're spending 1 year of that pavement's life every year. So if we say that our asphalt pavement is going to last 15 years, this time next year, it's only got 14 left. The year after, 13 years left, and so on. So when we're not watching, it's aging. That happens to people too, sadly. So to break even, what I have to do with my overall network is generate 1 year of pavement life for every mile in my network. And I have to continue doing this every single year. So think of it like a bank account. Dollars and years, though, are not equal because the cost to do the maintenance treatment doesn't necessarily, a bigger cost doesn't necessarily give you a bigger extension on life. So every maintenance treatment has a cost and it has a benefit. So we need to look at each situation and figure out the best combination. Cost is generally a function of the treatment itself, but the benefit is a function of timing and when we are applying that treatment along that deterioration curve. So again, do the right treatment on the right road at the right time. So here's another way to look at this. Remaining service life. If you look at our little condition graph here and we do nothing, we're going to lose 1 year of life every single year. So if we're going to do something, we need it to be efficient. Go back to risk. What is the risk if we have a good roadway and we don't do anything? Well, there's not a lot of risk. It's in good shape. It's probably going to be in good shape next year. If I do something, it's going to be low cost, but the return on investment is going to be pretty high if I can keep that roadway in the green, as I call it. We're keeping a high condition level that's really pushing that deterioration curve way on out in time. That's what I want to do. So it's not a lot of risk, but also not a lot of cost, but pushing that time frame further out in front of us is helpful. So that improves the return on investment. Now, when I get down to the roadways that are in fair condition, if I don't do anything, there is some risk there. If I fix it, there's moderate cost, and again, a fairly high return on that investment. When I get to this critical roadway, though, it's really about to hit that inflection point and go downhill quickly. This is where you see the highest risk if you do nothing. It is going to take a little bit more of an investment, but it is necessary at this point. If we don't get something corrected before we pass the inflection point on that curve, then it's going to get really expensive. We're going to have to do some major construction and maintenance activities. Now, when we get down into the poor category, everybody can think of a road right now in your area that's probably not in the greatest shape. What is your risk? Your risk is minimal because if you don't do something, what is that road going to look like next year? Still going to be bad. We really haven't lost that much, but to fix it, it's going to cost a whole lot of money. So low risk, and it kills your budget. So these are the ones that we really don't want to work with if we're trying to manage the overall system. Looking at a network level assessment of remaining service life, we want to think of it in terms of lane mile years. How many lanes on the roadway, how many miles long, that tells us how many lane miles total, but then the years part is how many years of service do I have left, and that will vary by road. But if I total that up for my entire network, that tells me the balance in my roadway bank account, essentially. That tells me how much value I have in my overall system. So as an example, let's just say that we have a network with 500 miles of paved roadways. All of them are 2 lanes and they are paved with hot mix asphalt. Okay, they're all the same, makes it very simple. But I did my condition survey and found that 20% of those are in good condition. 45% of those are yellow, we'll call fair condition. 25% orange, 10% poor condition. So now if I take the number of lane miles, multiply that by the years of life remaining, that will tell me the remaining service life. So what I have to guess is for each condition category, what's the remaining life? And that's kind of the crystal ball. We don't really know, but the longer we do a good job of collecting data, we're going to get a real good feel for this. So for our example with 500 miles, 2 lanes on each of those miles means we have a total of 1,000 lane miles in the system. 20% of those are green. So 1,000 times 0.2, that's 20% of it. But then I have to multiply that by the years of life remaining. And if we say that a brand new one lasts 15 years, a good condition one maybe gives us 13 more years. So 13 times that 20% of 1,000 is a total of 2,600 lane mile years. In the yellow category, maybe we estimate I've got 9 years left on those pavements, times the 4,500 lane miles gives me 4,050 lane mile years. And then continue that, the critical condition roads give me 1,000 lane mile years. And the poor condition really has nothing left. So you could give it some minimal amount, or you could just go ahead and call it 0. But once they're in poor condition, again, your risk is low. They're still going to be in poor condition next year. But once they're in the red, I would say that you have very little left in terms of life. Now, if we add all of those together, that gives me 7,650 lane mile years of value. So my roadway network account has 7,650 lane mile years. So now over time, we look at this breakdown. We had 20% good, 45% fair, 25% critical, 10% poor, and start thinking year to year, how does this shift if I don't do anything? The next year, some, but not all, of my good roads will probably turn to fair. So I said 16 of them stay good. 4 of those shift down to the yellow category. Most of my yellow stayed yellow, but some of those shifted down. 7 of them shifted to a critical state. And then same thing happened with the orange category. I had 8 that shifted down to poor category. Now you can see it's starting to compress my graph, where I'm seeing more of the reds and oranges, less of the green and yellow. Not really what I want, but I didn't have to spend any money either. Year 3, same thing happens. We see more progression, and you can see the box of the red condition starting to increase and get a little bigger each time. If we total that up, given those estimated remaining years of service life, we've gone from 7,650 in our account. In year 2, we're down to 6,820. In year 3, 6,020 lane mile years. So the value of my network is decreasing. Okay, and if we put that in percentages, I've lost about 20% of my network value. All right, now let's look at it from a different perspective. What if we just try to fix what's broken? And I think that happens more often than we would like to admit, because we do have the pressure to take a roadway that's in really bad shape and do something. That there's public perception there. This road is terrible. You didn't do anything about it. It looks bad on you. So we do need to do that. The other piece of that is when you have a very poor condition roadway, we do have a responsibility to do enough of something to it to keep it safe, keep it drivable, and not have, a lot of potholes that are causing people to dodge into another lane and have a head-on collision, something like that. So there is a responsibility to do something, even though it's going to be very expensive to fix it. But let's just say that that was kind of our goal. So let's fix. We got to get those 10 miles there fixed up. So year 2, I fixed some of them, but still it's a losing battle because 4 of my roadways are moving down into a different category. I'm still seeing that I can't keep up because the cost to do this major rehabilitation, I fixed some of them. So it looks like I had 10 the first year in the red category, and you see the green was 20. I lost 4 of those to yellow. I brought 10 or out of the 10 red ones, I brought 4 of those up to good condition to replace the 4 that went down to fair condition. So I maintained over this 3-year time frame, I basically maintained the green category. So that's positive. I'm shrinking on the yellow, kind of maintained on the critical. The problem is that red category is still outrunning me. So that expensive part is not really the best. So you can see what happened there. Some of those move up to green, everything else is shifting down. So unless I can fix enough of the red ones to keep that shift in check, I'm still going to be outrun by those poor condition roadways. Okay, what about our remaining service life of the network? Well, I've gone from 7,650 down to 7,060. So I've still lost, but not nearly as much as I lost by doing nothing. But I had to spend a whole bunch of money because the kinds of projects that I did were the most expensive type. So I spent a lot of money, still lost overall value. Now, if we focus more on preservation and think about the risk involved with the different types of treatments, I could do things a little bit differently. So if we look here, we've got some of the greens that go down to yellow, the yellows go to orange, the orange goes to red. But I pull in here in the yellow and the orange categories, and I bring some of those back up to good condition. So between year 1 and year 2, I've increased the green block. The yellow block got smaller, the orange block got smaller, the red block, though, still gaining on me. For year 3, we do something similar. We focus on those yellow and orange. We're able to really beef up the green category, but our red category is sneaking up on us. So I think we can see that there's definitely some benefit. Those early treatments cost less, and the cost that we're spending is so much less, but we're seeing a lot more green. That part of this plan is great. And that's one of the things that we really need to do, but we can't totally do that at the expense of losing out on the red category. So what happened with our remaining service life? From this plan, we started at 7,650. On year 3, we're up to 8,140. So I have gained value in my network. Still had to spend a bunch of money, but not as much as we might have thought if we had used a different strategy. So here at least we are improving the overall value. Now, I would argue that the thing to do is to balance the system. We definitely want to focus on preservation, do as much preventive maintenance as possible, but also not forget about those poor condition roadways. So maybe we have something like this and we choose to do some treatments in the yellow, orange, and a minimal amount in the red category. That's going to help us. It's still hard to keep up, and I think everyone is pretty well on board with the fact that it's nearly impossible to keep up with everything that needs to be done. But balancing some of this is going to at least give us some time where we can focus maybe later. If we can bring more of this and get rid of all the oranges, have all green and yellow, then I may have some extra budget money available to start treating some of the red roads. The other thing that you can do, if you can demonstrate that you have this program in place and that you have this full strategy, you're collecting the data, making these decisions, sometimes you can get extra funding for some of the specific projects on the red roads. The key is to prevent as many of the orange and yellows from dropping into the red condition. So if you can treat those and then very slowly build up or get some separate pot of money, some separate funding or maybe grants, something like that, to treat some of those red category roadways, that can help catch up too. Locally, it was one city municipality, and they were able to pass a sales tax, extra sales tax, to do exactly that. Create a separate pot of money to treat the roads that were in really bad condition and use their entire maintenance budget just for the fair and critical condition roadways. And some of the constituents actually went to the mayor and said, "Thank you for passing the sales tax." He said, "That's a sentence I never thought I would ever hear, but it made sense." And they also did a good job of communicating the plan to the public to explain how this works and why they were doing what they were doing. So balancing the system, we have gained some in our overall value of the system, gained 140 lane mile years, and we were able to treat some of all categories. Now, if we focus more on preservation, maybe we do something like this. So you can see that there are 1,001 ways you can address this, but I think it is very important to point out, no matter which plan of attack you choose, you definitely need to include treatments on some of those better, the yellows and the oranges, not just focusing on the red. So balance the treatment, try to focus on as much preservation as possible, add as much value as possible, and be sure to maintain safety. There we are. So in this plan, we have added 280 lane mile years, and you can do trial and error with this all day long. It's kind of fascinating. The hardest part is public perception. If you don't have a good campaign to explain this to the public, you will hear so many times, "I don't know why they're working on that road. It's not bad. Mine is terrible. What are they doing? They don't even know. Have they even been to my road? Do they know what's going on?" So you can get into some, it's kind of touchy just with public perception and knowing, make sure that they know you are on the schedule. Maybe it's 2 years from now, we're going to do a bigger type reconstruction or a major corrective maintenance, something like that. But let those constituents know that you're aware. You have condition data, you know what it is, and it won't be now, but you're definitely on the list. And sometimes that can help quite a bit. All right, any questions? I do see one comment that came in. In Chula Vista, we have a measure P, which helps us pay for our failed assets, which that's great. And there is a website listed there. So something where you are kind of separating your preventive maintenance from your major rehabilitation type projects, that can be a good way to explain to the public. And if this is public, like on this website and the public can go to it, I think that's a great way to manage some of the educational components of this. All right, I don't see anything else at this point, so we will move along. All right, next is equivalent annualized cost or equivalent annual cost, EAC. This is just a measure of the cost per unit per year of added life. In other words, how much does it cost for a certain treatment, but put it normalized in terms of how many years you get from it. So that cost per year. So the best way to explain that is maybe you do some crack sealing, and that's going to last you an estimated 4 years, or you could do an overlay, and that will last you maybe an estimated 12 years. If you take the cost of that project divided by the number of years that you hope to get from it, what is your cost per year? A lot of times we get a little bit short-sighted in looking at budgets, because when you say, "Hey, here's the treatment that I think needs to happen on this roadway," and you present that to the mayor, you go to quorum court with it, the first question that happens when you send that up the chain is, how much is that going to cost? And to a dollars person, it's really kind of about the right now cost, because they're working with right now's budget. We're looking at big picture, long term. We're trying to get the most long-term benefit out of this. So it's helpful when you have maybe a mayor that's been in office for a number of years, or is going to be in office, or wants to be in office for a number of years, as opposed to someone who's serving a 2-year term. They just got to make all the numbers work out for a couple of years, and then they move on to something else. it's a little bit more of a hurdle to get past when you have those different situations involved. So having someone in charge of your street department or road department that's got more of a big picture, long-term view of things, this is where we need to start looking at it, putting it in context in the right way to make sure that all the decision makers understand what are the impacts now, what are the impacts later on. The other thing we need to do with our cost estimates is make sure that we're using apples and apples. Are we going to use miles, lane miles, square yards, square feet? And this will depend some on what treatment it is, but that is something that needs to be compared again, apples to apples. And then the years of added life have to be estimated. And that's the tricky part too, because you can't promise, yes, if we do this treatment on this road, it's going to last us until 2037. I don't know if it's going to last that long, but we need to have some educated guesses at what type of response we will get from a given treatment. Now, equivalent annual costs, let's say we have a few tools in our toolbox and we choose preventive type treatments, and on average those cost us around $3,000 per lane mile. And those types of treatments, they're not going to last forever, but relatively low expense, relatively small additional life. But if we spend $3,000 per lane mile and get 3 more years, that's essentially costing us $1,000 per lane mile year. For more of a corrective type treatment, we might apply these to the more fair condition roadways. If, say, it's $13,000 per lane mile and adds 5 years, that means we're spending $2,600 per lane mile a year. The orange category, correct and repair, is going to be something more expensive, but the more we do, we tend to expect a little bit more permanency to it. And something like that might give us a value of $7,500 per lane mile a year. So again, it is more expensive, lasting a little bit longer, but this is a way we can compare apples and apples. Then of course the red ones, they cost a whole bunch. And we get good out of that, but it's still not going to last forever. So when we start looking at it this way, it kind of makes sense. We would do some of those smaller treatments to our green and yellow roads. We're going to get more value overall. We're spending less for the same extension on life. So if we put together a chart for your agency, what are the treatments that you typically do? If you're a city or a municipality, you may not use chip seals, whereas a county road department may use a whole lot of chip seals or variations on that. So whatever your tools are, and then maybe look at some other tools that you could use, other treatment types, and what is the cost. Now, I'm always reluctant to put numbers like this on a slide. This is certainly not the be all end all of correct numbers on cost. It's very dependent on a lot of different factors. So this is kind of things that we see here in Arkansas. I know a lot of you that are tuned in on the webinar are from other states, so could be wildly different from these numbers. It also makes a big difference if you're doing asphalt work. Oil prices impact things quite a bit. If you do the work in-house, if you've got a large crew, lots of equipment, and you can do things in-house, that may make your prices lower. If you have to contract everything out, you're hiring a contractor to bring in lots of equipment, you're going to have mobilization charges, all that kind of thing. It's going to be much more expensive to have someone else come in and do that. Your availability of different types of materials, that will affect it. Even some road departments will put like personnel salary monies. Some places don't count that toward the cost of a project, some do. So that can make a big difference. And then I've also listed here estimated service life extension in years for some of the different types of treatments. This is very dependent on, again, putting the right treatment on the right road at the right time. It also depends on climate and traffic. So depending on your your particular situation, these numbers, you really need to develop a chart like this for your area. Now, collecting your data and figuring out what condition your roadways are in. We need to have all of this data, and I like, this is a system that just uses Excel and some of the macros that are built into that. So you collect data and you give each roadway a category. And you can give it a number as well. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But I like visuals, I like colors, and so the red, green, yellow, orange type thing is very easy for me to look at quickly and get a sense of what's going on. So in choosing projects, again, we want to balance that out by condition, treatment types, traffic volumes, political zones. Sometimes it's more than just the pavement itself. Sometimes we need to kind of share with other parts of our district. Maybe we put that in zones or wards, or however your elected officials are zoned. You may want to match portions of your funding to each one of those zones. And you can do that within each category. Now, Project Value Index, PVI. This is the value that you're going to get from a project, and that's calculated as traffic multiplied by the years added, and that's actually lane mile years that are added from a potential treatment. And that's divided by the cost of that project and the pavement condition value right now. So if you have that data, you can plug this in, calculate your PVI. So traffic, if you have actual traffic numbers, traffic volumes, wonderful. If you don't, do you have a way to get that? Is that something that you could move into as kind of a next level data collection type thing? Sometimes folks will just use the number of rooftops that are served by a certain roadways. Sometimes it's just put into categories, low, medium, and high. And as long as you have something to quantify that in some way, that's better than nothing. And then in the future, one of your goals could be to establish those numbers a little bit more accurately. In terms of service extension or years added, it's usually a range. It's going to depend on traffic and weather, and that's going to need to be something that experience will help to kind of pin down. We don't have the crystal ball. I wish we did. We all wish we had that, but we can at least give it a really good guesstimate to try to figure out, relatively speaking, what types of service lives we'll get. Cost, look at your construction history. Have you done this before? Do you have numbers from previous jobs? And then what if you're trying something new? I will say that trying something new always costs more on the front end because there's a little bit of hesitancy. We don't know what we're doing yet. We're not good at this. It's going to cost more, or maybe we mess up, have to rip part of it out and redo it. A contractor trying something new is going to kind of build in a fluff factor to their estimates, but once everyone gets comfortable with it, or maybe you buy some more equipment and don't have to contract out that part, those numbers will change. So keep tabs on that. Now, pavement condition value. This is kind of the holy grail of figuring out a lot of things. There is a system within the ASTM, it's D6433, where it uses a scale of 1 to 100, kind of like assigning a grade to the roadway, and that's your pavement condition index. There's an entire process around that. Some folks use that. There are some programs, some equipment technology that can be used. There are training classes on this. Some agencies use it, love it, and do really, really well. Others kind of fall into a trap of it's more complicated than what we've done before. We don't have the personnel to keep up with it. I would argue that if you can't keep up with it and you can't maintain it, it's really not going to be a huge benefit for you. So start with something manageable. You can always grow your system in the future. If you come up with your own system, I know some of our local counties will just drive down the road and give it a 1, 2, 3, or a 5, 3, 4, 5. So a scale of 1 to 5, what condition do you think it's in? If you have multiple folks that are grading those roads, grading like scoring, Each person has their own perception. Driving in a different type of vehicle will make it feel different. Different levels of expertise, what they're looking for. So it's good to have some training so that you have all of your folks who are assigning these condition levels, make sure they're all on the same page and kind of get the same relative scale. The important thing on your scale, whether you use a 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 100, the better the condition, the higher the number needs to be for that equation to work. Okay, so project value index, looking back at this again, it's a relative comparison. So there's nothing magic about that particular number, but what it's going to do is consider the traffic. And the more traffic you have, the higher the value of that project. The more years added by a given treatment selection, well, that's going to give you more, it's going to kind of give preference to the jobs or the projects that add more years. It will give preference to lower cost items, and it will give preference to the worst condition roadways. So that's a little bit of a balancing act there. But when we're looking at the project value and we're trying to just select a treatment, the treatment is on the same roadway. So traffic is the same and condition of that roadway is the same because it's the same road. So really all we're comparing is how many years added as opposed or compared to the cost. So we're back to that equivalent annualized cost. So looking at treatment selection is fairly simple. So let's just do an example of one of those real quick. So we've got a cracked 4-mile, 2-lane paved roadway that serves 1,000 vehicles every day. Maintenance options include a traditional hot mix overlay and a hybrid chip seal. Which one has the better project value index? Well, an overlay cost, let's say that's $60,000 per lane mile, and we're going to get 12 to 15 years out of that. A hybrid chip seal, though, might cost $35,000, but we're only going to get 8 to 10 years out of that. How do we compare? Let's plug it into this equation. 1,000 vehicles daily. We've got our lane mile years, added, like how many years of additional service are we going to get? We have cost. And then for condition, if you look over in the little scale, I've got the graph there with the star. We're kind of in that critical range. So let's give it a 5 out of 10. If we're using a 1 to 10 scale, I would call that a 5. So let's calculate for the overlay. Take our 1,000 times 13 and a half. How did I get 13 and a half? Well, for the overlay, we said it would last 12 to 15 years on average. I just took the middle of that. And then the cost, I took 8 times 60. The 8 comes from 4 miles, but there are 2 lanes in those 4 miles. So 2 times 4 is 8. And then 60 is the cost times the pavement condition value there on the bottom part of the equation being a 5, comes out to a 5.625 PVI. Does that number mean anything? No, not really. But if I do the same thing for the hybrid chip seal, I get a 6.429. Does that number mean anything? Not by itself, but the bigger answers, the bigger benefit. So all I can really do is just give this a relative comparison, and I do get a bigger number with the hybrid chip seal, so I am going to get a slightly larger benefit monetarily when you put all of the factors together. So doing this, I might say, well, I've run the numbers, this is going to be the better option. And then you have a way to present that to your supervisor. So looking at individual projects, we can compare treatments, but what about when we're trying to decide, should I treat this road or should I treat that road? Well, here we are back to the same equation. And again, we're going to give more weight to the higher traffic, the higher years added, the lower cost options are preferred. but our poorer condition roadways are actually going to get a bump. And this kind of helps moderate things. But be careful using this equation because it may give a little bit too much preference to some of your failed roadways. So that's going to take some just experience and oversight. So here's an example of doing a 4-lane mile overlay where we have 8,000 vehicles per day. Let's assume we get 12 years out of that. 12 times 4 lanes is 48 lane mile years added. $360,000 for the cost and a pavement condition value of 60. Calculates out at a 17.8 PVI. Or can I spend my money on a 10 lane mile chip seal? 2,700 vehicles per day, 7 years of life added. So that's a total of 70 lane mile years, $140,000. My current pavement condition value is 70, and my PVI turns out to be 19.3. That is a higher number than the other one. So using this system, it's going to kind of show me which one gives me the most bang for my buck. And it may not always be the obvious answer. All right. At this point, let's see. I don't see any new questions that have come in, but I've got some situations here where we'll just work through kind of the thought process of how to do some of these. So here we have Maple Street. This is a 1.5 mile segment. There are 2 lanes. It's a hot mix asphalt surface that is 5 years old. It's in a subdivision. And that subdivision has maybe 200 vehicles per day, 35 mile an hour maximum speed. The problems right now are that the color has faded. There are a few small cracks starting to show. They're maybe up to 1/4 of an inch. We're going to call that low severity. And then the density of those cracks, and we haven't really talked so much about identifying the distresses, but with cracking in particular, or any distress, I guess, what is the distress? How big is the distress? And how much of it do you have? So the severity of those cracks deal with how wide the crack is. The density of the cracking is how much of it is on the roadway. What percentage of that roadway is experiencing that type of cracking? The other thing that was noted was that the cracks that are showing up now are in the wheel path. So let's kind of break this down. For Maple Street, I can plug in the name. We know the lanes, the length of the section. So multiplying those 2 lanes times the length tells us that there are 3 lane miles that we're working with. We've got a hot mix asphalt surface. The structure, we didn't really get any info on that, so I'm not sure. There might be some records somewhere you could dig up. But it's the local road. It's in terms of functional class. Traffic level is pretty low traffic. Existing distresses do sound like fatigue. So that's something in the wheel path. Even though it's low severity, moderate density, it's not that bad now. But it is in the category that's leading us toward a structural problem. So this is something that immediately I'm thinking, hey, we need to fix this now before it becomes a bigger problem. So is it a structural problem? Yes, even though it's in the early stages. Was there any mention of isolated base failures? No. And let's say that we've got a fair current condition, maybe give it a 72 on that 1 to 100 PCI scale. Remaining service life, probably 7 years. So those, again, are things that we kind of have to use our judgment, engineering judgment, and best guesses on. So that's what we know about Maple Street. I'm going to plug in this information, calculated project value index, and I'm going to look at a lot of different options. So if I might use crack seal, maybe fog seal, slurry seal, single chip seal, hybrid chip seal, scrub seal, microsurfacing, profile milling, cape seal, ultra thin, thin hot mix, overlay, traditional overlays, mill and fill, base repair, rehab, reconstruction. So lots of choices there. And you can maybe narrow this down, or maybe you have some other things that you do to expand that list, but customize this list to what you currently do, and then you can always add to that later. So there are some things here, and you can tell that that street had some nice houses on it, and it's not normally the type of street that's going to generate complaints. However, some of the residents were worried about, hey, this may be a problem. So knowing the area that it's in kind of helps shape what type of treatment would be acceptable or not. I'm not so sure that they would enjoy seeing a lot of crack seal placed dribbled here and there on the roadway, as my kids used to call that the Sharpie marker road, where it looked like somebody drew on the road with a Sharpie marker. It functions, but maybe aesthetically it's not always the optimal choice. So we do have to consider some of that. So I'm going to put this as a maybe. Fog seal, I don't think fog seal would work. It would definitely benefit somewhat, but fog seal typically works for up to about 1/8 inch cracks. So these being more 1/4 inch, I'm not sure how well that would work on its own. Slurry seal, certainly an option. Chip seal, it's not the kind of neighborhood where they typically would be accepting of a chip seal, so probably put that in a probably not. Same thing for the hybrid chip seal, scrub seal. Microsurfacing, though, is more like a traditional looking pavement. Profile milling, I don't think we have any reason to do that yet. Tape seal, probably not. Ultra thin might be a good option. Thin overlay, we could do a traditional overlay. I think that's overkill, but it's possible. So these other things don't really apply. So for all the things that we think might be a good option, we're going to look at how many years of life would be added, what is the unit cost, and I've got this in terms of thousands of dollars per lane mile, and then calculate that years per $1,000 per lane mile. That's that equivalent annualized cost. Also, figure your total cost in terms of thousands, and let's do that for all of the options that we think might work. When you start looking at that added life per cost, you see in this column, the biggest number is up here at the top. Crack seal, that's where we get the most bang for our buck. That's what we should do. But also, I think in that example, that's where the mayor lived or some of the councilmen or something. Anyway, they decided that was not a good option, so maybe we moved to scrub seal. That's probably not good. So just looking through the list, what are the better options? And you can get a good gauge of normalizing those numbers, comparing apples to apples. How much more value do you get? Maybe you could justify crack seal. But at some point you have to pick. So we take this forward to our supervisors, and they say, microsurfacing is something that we would like to add. Notice in that picture we had curb and gutter. So one of the things that you want to avoid, if you don't have to do this, if you did a traditional overlay, you would probably actually have to mill and fill, or you're going to pave into the curbs. You're going to mess up some of the drainage. Something very thin as a surface treatment is going to allow drainage patterns to stay essentially the same. Curbs still function. Microsurfacing is very thin, so that is also an advantage, and it looks like it's been repaved. So aesthetically, practically, maybe not the best monetarily, but this was the one that was chosen. Then we have another situation. Here's one that's Bentley Lane, 4 miles, it's 2 lanes. It's got an asphalt surface with good structure overall. 17 years old, so it's in a residential area, primary collector, about 800 vehicles per day, and this road was kind of I won't say over constructed, but it was beefed up pretty well when it was built years ago, with the expectation that there was going to be some other commercial development in the area, which did not end up happening. So the lucky thing for the roadway is that we've got a lot of structure, with less than the anticipated traffic. But we're seeing some small cracks, low to moderate severity, but a fairly high density. Some of these cracks appear to be connected in a square type pattern that's going to be consistent with block cracking, which is actually a non-structural type of a thing. So 2 lanes, 4 miles, that's 8 lane miles, asphalt, unknown structure, but we do know enough to know that it was good. It's a collector, moderate traffic level, block cracking. So that is not structural. That's good. That means we have more options in our treatment basket. No isolated base failures. We've got fair condition, maybe 8 years of life left. Now we go to our treatment options and we choose several options. Again, we don't really need to do the major reconstruction, base repair, mill and fill, none of that type thing. But microsurfacing, scrub seal might work, hybrid, chip seal, slurry seal, fog seal. So I do the same thing I did before and start calculating how much life I get per cost, per lane mile. And when I flesh all of this out, I see that a fog seal is going to give us some good. Scrub seal, pretty good. The hybrid double chip seal, also a good option. And push this forward, and fog seal was selected. Given the low level of traffic, this might give us enough good. It's not going to be a long-term solution, but for now, it might be good enough. Then we've got Muddy Fork Road. This is 2.8 miles. This is in a more rural setting. There's 2 lanes, chip sealed. The chip seal is 8 years old, so we've got some age on it for sure. It's in a rural area. It's a collector, about 350 vehicles per day. Some of those are trucks. That note should not be there. Sorry about that. Base failures. We do see some base failures. There's some chip loss, some raveling. So basically, chip seal's getting old, and we've got a few base failures. So filling in information here, we've got 5.6 lane miles total. Currently, it's a chip seal, so that does tell us that a chip seal would probably be acceptable in that area moving forward. But isolated base failures could indicate some structural, but since they're isolated, I'm just going to put it over in that category, and everything else is basically non-structural. Fair to critical condition, gave it about a 65 PCI. With a couple of years of service life left before it was completely gone. So putting together those treatment options, again, same kind of thing. How much added life would you get from different treatment options? Now notice that the different situations, we don't get the same added life on all 3 of these roadways because they're in different conditions. They have different situations. So we're not getting the same amount of added life for the treatments on different roadways. So that's the part that you really need to zero in on. In one situation, this treatment might give you 5 years. In another situation, you might only get 2, 3. So finishing out this table, we've got a couple of things going on here, though. The one thing is that we know there were some isolated base failures. That's one of those problems that goes pretty deep. So regardless of the treatment selection, we really need to fix that first. That needs to be fixed from the bottom up. So that's one that, whether the number is good or not, you want to go ahead and fix that part. And then looking at the numbers, the next highest value is a single chip seal, which means that's reasonable. Time to replace that chip seal, put another layer there. The other thing, though, that stood out is that we had some issues with chip retention on that chip seal, and fog seal can be put on top of the chip seal to help with that. So one thing that we might look at is not just picking one of these items, but picking multiple, a combination of treatments. So if I pick all of these treatments, I might get a total of 9 years out of this, and unit cost there with an added, when you put that all together, 0.231, that's pretty decent. And then your cost is listed. So we might choose to do that entire combination of items and get benefit from all three of them. All right, and then the fourth project, potential project, is Hazel Avenue. It's 3.5 miles, 4 lanes, 8 inches of hot mix, crushed stone base. It's an industrial arterial, albeit in not that large of a town, but 3,000 vehicles per day with trucks, and we're seeing a lot of fatigue cracking and rutting. And the expectation is with that rutting, when you have a lot of fatigue cracking, lots of trucks, it is most likely subgrade rutting, not just mixed rutting. So filling in our chart here, we've got a total of 14 lane miles, asphalt, arterial, it is structural, and we have isolated base failures. So poor condition, remaining service life, maybe a year. So this is one of those where we're down in the red section. It's going to be a more expensive project. And you notice all of these milder treatment options are really not going to do the trick. So we're limited to doing a traditional overlay, maybe mill and fill, base repair, rehab, reconstruction. I think you could also argue that a traditional overlay with the trucks and how it's performed in the past is still kind of a temporary measure, but it is an option. So let's see how the numbers flesh out. All right, base repair, we definitely need to do. Beyond that, we don't have real stellar numbers here. Probably should do reconstruction, rehab, but the cost is going to be a little bit difficult. So maybe we choose to do the multiple treatments, do a mill and fill and a base repair, try to get those really bad spots fixed, and then do a mill and fill over the top of that. So that might be a stopgap method that we think we could afford to get done within the current year's budget for the coming year. So if we select that multiple treatment, then that would be our way to go. All right, so those were 4 different situations where we looked at different treatments. And now that we've picked out the optimal treatment for each of those, I go to the budget and say, well, can't do them all. So how do I choose between these very different types of projects? So for each of the 4 situations we've just worked through, we've got a total cost, and we've calculated PVI. That's the project value index. So at Maple Street, we've got a value of 0.444. Bentley Lane is a 4.286. Muddy Fork Road is 1.778. Hazel Avenue is 2.958. Now, I think we're pushing it a little bit on Hazel Avenue that mill and fill is going to last very long, but it ranks in at number 2. Remember that calculation does give some priority to the poorer condition roadways. Now, what type of priority? Well, Maple Street and Bentley Lane really fall into the preservation category. Muddy Fork is in the critical category, which means we're about to hit that inflection point, or maybe have just hit the inflection point in the condition. That means there's a lot of risk. So thinking risk, Muddy Fork Road is the one that absolutely should be done. And if we look at our budget, we can do all of them. We can't afford to do all of them, but we could do all of the ones except for the one that is a major rehabilitation, and we can afford to do 3 projects rather than just the one. If we looked at it from a worst first standpoint, we would try to do Hazel Avenue, maybe dip into the following year's budget and still be struggling. Meanwhile, Muddy Fork and some of these others are slipping in condition, and we're not making any progress. So it is definitely a balancing act, not easy to make those decisions, but this is at least a way to give a cursory look at some numbers to say we're being fair. We're not biased in any way there. So our total cost here was over $400,000, but I got 3 projects done. This other project's about a $2 million project. So if you could come up with some funding from a different source, that would be a great place to try to slide that one in. But I think it is important to go ahead and treat these others before you lose the value in all of those miles. All right, any questions? All right, the question is, how did you decide on the added life for each treatment? So we did go through a lot of those sheets, lots of treatments there, and it's not a definite. It's not an exact science for sure, but just knowing about each of those treatments, what they're designed to do, what they're intended to do, and then coming up with some estimates. Now, we'll make the statement here that on everything that I have shown you, it's from the context of a smaller local agency, like county road departments, smaller cities, not for metropolitan areas, not for state highways, not major freeways, anything like that. So that's also going to give a little bit of flavor to the cost estimates that you saw. If you were from a major metropolitan area, you were looking at that thing, and those are crazy numbers. That makes no sense. Looking at this from a rural county road department maybe puts it in better context. But all of this is for a little bit more of a rural setting, more of a low volume type roadway. So when I was talking about a low traffic, high traffic kind of thing, it's all relative to your area. All right, next we will look at some online tools, and these are on the Arkansas LTAP website. So if you go to cttp.org/ARLTAP, there is a tab up at the top that says Arkansas LTAP. From there, you can hit that drop down that says ARLTAP topics. There's also a button here on the home page where you can click. When you click those topics, it will come up with a page, and the whole top row is pavement management type things. The first one is the pavement management planning tool. When you click that, it will open a page and it has some information here, and there are a few quick links, some information on pavement management. It'll bring up some technical briefs. Down in the description here, it tells you that we're going to use this tool by selecting a distress. So if you have a roadway you're thinking about, you're not sure what to do with it, what the right thing is, this will be a tool to maybe help you figure that out. And then also we'll look at some budget information. So step 1, for your roadway, what distress do you think that is? So step 1, you'll go down further on this page and select the appropriate distress. If you're not sure, you can click it. There's some pictures. See if that looks and is described like what you're seeing on your roadway. Step 2 is to select a severity level. How to measure that distress is another little hot link there that you can pull up some more information on how to look at that. And then you'll select the density of the distress and look at your treatment options. So clicking pavement management in general will pull up some pages like this, distress IDs, how to measure, and then we get into the list of possible distresses. So let's say that you saw what you thought was fatigue cracking. You click fatigue cracking and that will open a segment that will show some pictures. And if you choose mild, maybe it looks something like this. And again, fatigue cracking often shows up in the wheel paths, so concentrated in the wheel path. Those are interconnected cracks. And really, we think about these as being your next pothole, especially when you get to the severe category. So from here, what is that severity level? And again, this is going to be crack width. So looking at how to measure the distress, we'll go through that. And you decide if you're mild, moderate, or severe. And there are descriptions that go with that. Next, it will ask you to select a density. Do you feel like this is low density fatigue cracking or high density? So if we chose low density, then we scroll down to step 4 and it says, see my treatment options. You click that button and it will come up with a list. And each one of these items, then you click on it and there will be a little technical brief that tells you a little bit about that particular treatment option, what it's for, how to select the project, what types of materials are used, some cost information. Again, take that with a grain of salt because it'll be different all over the country. And then what type of pavement life extension would you expect to see from that particular treatment? And there will be a couple of categories there. Maybe your current surface is asphalt. The one that's showing on top right now is slurry seal. So if it's 3 to 5 years old in good to fair condition, you've got lower traffic or higher traffic. Again, that's in the context of an overall kind of low traffic situation. But the more traffic you have, the less life extension you would expect to see from any of the treatments. So that's all kind of put in there as a little bit of a guideline, at least a relative comparison. Right? And then during construction, it does show a few best practices and things to think about during that. This is not all you need to know. Okay? This is giving you some information. Go online, look for more detail, talk with contractors in your area, and that sort of thing. Don't just rely on this, of course. So after you've looked through those and decided what treatment you think is best, then another tool that's available here is to look at the 5-year budget worksheet. And this is an Excel sheet that I put together. And it just is a way to put in some of the information that you have and then play with some numbers to be able to start seeing how these different changes have the potential to affect your 5-year budget. So the first thing to do is put in the total number of lane miles in your network. Our example had the 500 miles and it was 2-lane roadways. So that's 1,000 total lane miles. And then next put in your current year budget. Next, you need to have some roadway condition data. And specifically, this is going to be what percent of your roadway network falls into each of these categories. Excellent, it's kind of like your brand new stuff. In this one, we put 4, good was 25%, fair was 38%, critical 23%, poor 10%. So whatever method you are using to assign condition levels to your roadways, get a percentage of each one of those. The next little section is kind of estimating the treatment costs for what you typically do. So if you had a roadway that's excellent, you're not going to do anything to it, but good roads, you might do a little bit of crack sealing, you might do a fog seal, something like that. So it doesn't really assign a certain treatment, but kind of lump those into a category of what would that cost be for a roadway in good condition. What are those typical preventive type things that you would do? What's an average cost for that? And on average, what added life would you be giving to that pavement? And then we also need to know, given its current condition, about how many remaining years of life do you think that pavement has? If you look at your fair condition roadways, the types of fixes that you would apply might cost X amount. I've got 28,000 per lane mile plugged in here with a 5-year added life, and that's for pavements that on average maybe have 8 years of service remaining. And so you can see that that's plugged in for each one. Now you will enter your data for each of the light yellow boxes. And then there's a percent of your budget reserved for emergency or specific safety things. Some agencies don't do this. They have a separate pot of money for that. But if your overall maintenance budget gets tapped anytime, you know, we had a flood and this bridge blew out and we had to take money from the road maintenance budget and move it over here. Is there a certain amount? Sometimes folks will keep a percentage available for those unexpected emergencies. If you have that, plug that into that box. So then that tells you how much is remaining. The other thing that you can adjust in here, I call it drop time. This is the time estimate or number of years that a roadway in a given condition will drop to the next condition level. So for example, an excellent roadway, it's maybe 2 years before it drops to good condition. A good roadway might take 6 years to drop to fair condition. It might be shorter than that, but you can adjust that for the types of things that you see in your network. A critical roadway, I think you've only got 2 before it drops. A poor roadway is already bad, so that one would be 0. Okay. And then next we have this, imagine this just scrolled up. Right here where the circle is, we've got some priorities to set. And we're going to just punch in some numbers and try to make a guess of how many lane miles I want to treat of each of these categories. And this really goes back to that balancing act of let's do some good, some fair, some critical. You know, I hope I can afford to do some that are in poor condition. So we're not going to hit all worst first. We're not going to hit all prevention. We're going to try to balance some of that. So you can take in these light yellow cells, you can put in a number of lane miles to treat, and it will calculate the cost based on the information that you gave it above. It will spit out what percent of your budget did that take, how many lane mile years were added, and then if you don't do something, what is that delay penalty? So right now, having nothing in there, this is kind of the default do nothing option. If you don't do anything long term, you're looking at a whole lot of money. So not doing something is going to drop pavements into a lower condition category and not look so good next time. Now, the other thing to look at here is your target lane mile year. So we had 1,000 lane miles in our network, and we know that every year we're losing 1 year of service. So every year I need to put 1,000 lane miles of service back into the network just to break even. So this really is my target. So this number is calculated or pulled from up above. And then as you change the numbers in these yellow cells, how many lane miles to treat in each category, the purple box will tell you how many lane mile years you are adding. And then what's your remaining funds to reach the goal, and go through some back and forth to see if that works out. So that purple is the lane mile years added by the plan for the lane miles that you put into these cells in yellow. All right, and then the last thing that I will point out here is that once you've done that, we know that roads that are treated, say in fair condition, I perform this treatment, they should be moved up into the good category. I also know that based on the drop time or how long it takes things to move to the next condition level, from year to year, I should have some that move up in color or move down in color. So for the lane miles that are treated, year 2 will automatically shift that. So it will add those green roads essentially to the mix. And for the roads that are not touched, it will drop those to a yellow, orange, or red. So it will also add a little bit of inflation here and there. So this will go all the way out. A lot of times as an agency worker, you're asked to give some type of a forecast. And so this is just a tool that's free. It's on our website. It's not everything that you need to know, but it at least will get you a good head start on being able to put some information together and say, here's what I think will happen. If we follow this plan, this is what we can do. A lot of trial and error, just to punch numbers in and visually see what impact that type of scenario can make. And then, of course, the last tabs are instructions. I also have an example plugged in there. So again, that is available on our website. You're welcome to use it, try it out. And if you have any comments, things that aren't working, things that you think would improve it, at any time, feel free to let me know. So we're always looking at how to improve that. All right, final thoughts. Looks like one question is, would you be able to share the presentation with us? Yes, if you look up in your little control bar thing for the webinar, there's looks like a piece of paper with a paper clip on it. The handout is available in your materials tab and you can download it. It is a PDF file. If you have trouble with that, feel free to send us an email and we can make sure I get that to you. All right, some final thoughts to share. The spreadsheet is on our website. So go to cttp.org. That will come up here at the end. I'll show you that again. But all right, a few things to consider. Specifications. Do you have good quality specifications for all of the processes and the materials that you're using for these different treatment options? Particularly when you're trying a new treatment. Maybe you've never done a hybrid chip seal and you think, hey, that sounds cool, I want to try it. Make sure that you have some specifications so that you can ensure that, especially if you're hiring a contractor to do the work, make sure that you've got some back and forth, you've got some control over how that's going to be monitored, how you're going to ensure that you're getting a quality product. The worst thing that can happen is we try something new, we don't do the right thing when we try it, it doesn't work out, and we say, well, that was a terrible idea, we'll never do that again. That might not have been the problem. Maybe it was just, it wasn't done right. So make sure that when you do try something, you try to pin down all those details so that you have the best possible outcome to get a really accurate assessment of how well that treatment performs. So if you don't have specifications, maybe look at your state specs, look at your quality control, quality assurance systems. Also, think about your timeline. A lot of times we collect all of this data, we get pavement conditions, and then we think about that for a while, and it takes a while to process enough data and decide what we want to do. Then we have to go through the budgeting process. Maybe there's an election coming up, there are some votes that have to happen, you know, the part that's in the political system before we get that budget approved. Then we can start to think about you know, the bids and the lettings and all of that kind of thing. How long is that timeline? And during that timeline, it could be a year or more. Sometimes it's multiple years. What's happening to the condition of your pavement? If you had said, well, I'm going to do a slurry seal, that's what's slated for here. I put this budget together and it got us over into a year later's construction season before we could actually do it. Is that pavement still in a good enough condition to benefit from a slurry seal, or does it now need something more substantial? So keep that in mind, especially when you're dealing with those roadways that are at the critical point. Pre-construction meetings. Make sure if you are contracting this out, have that pre-con meeting, meet with those folks, talk through all the scenarios, discuss those expectations, and really it's a good way to partner with a contractor. Sometimes you learn a lot of stuff, especially when you're trying something new. That was one of the benefits here locally that was discussed was, yeah, we didn't have the equipment to do that. We hired that out. We had someone else come in and do it, but they allowed us to, you know, be with them and kind of work with them on the job. they learned so much that then they said, we really like that. We're going to buy the equipment and we're going to be able to do it ourselves. So I thought that was a good perspective, good take on things. Remember that your pavement management system is your pavement management system. Knowing what is manageable for your group, knowing who gathers the data, who maintains it, how are you going to keep it going? It needs to be a system with longevity. It takes time to grow that system. So don't, go all in for a year and then drop it. Make sure that you can keep it up. Make sure it's not too complicated to keep it going. Figure out what works, what doesn't work, change it, document those successes. More importantly, document the failures because you don't want to do that again. Look for the root causes of those issues to make sure that you have an accurate assessment. But you're leaving a legacy here because once you get the system and have it set up and do it right, it will last longer than you last in your job. It should. It should be a long-term system. So it's a big picture, long-term type thing. We're trying to win the war, but we may not necessarily win the battle, and that's okay. All right, I don't see any questions that have come through other than about the spreadsheet. So I'm going to go on to this slide. This is our website address, www.cttp.org/AR-LTAP. If you go there, click on Arkansas LTAP, those LTAP topics, and the whole pavement management row that I showed on the screen that's in your presentation, that will step you through how to get to that. On the pavement management planning tool, the top right, there's a picture of a roadway with a link under it for the 5-year budget worksheet. Actually, I will just scroll back to right here. It will look something like this, and where you have the option to download that 5-year budget worksheet. You can download that, use it, edit, you can adjust it, make it work for you. It's not perfect, but it's at least a starting point to give you somewhere to grow from. So that is all I have at this point. I will go ahead to that last screen. I think I killed it. Yep, I killed it. So we'll try this one last time. Go down to the last slide. Put that website up here for you. And that is it. You are free to go. When you X out of or leave the webinar, you should have an evaluation. I would appreciate any feedback that you have. And I thank you all for attending. Have a great day.